Thanks again for having me for this. I thought I'd start with, these are super camouflaged insects. They're evolving the best they can to look like bits of plants, but I'm hoping you can see right there's like a little bit of an edge on the back, and then spines, and there's a bunch of them on the plant. And so, I'm mainly interested in behavior, and you see these, you stand looking at these critters, and you think, well, they're not doing anything. This is boring. At best, maybe they're feeding on it, but these are plant feeding insects as it happens. They exist on their food, on top of their food. All they need to do to feed is like reach down and suck some bit of sap from the plant. What possible behavior can be happening? And that impression that you get is more often than you expect, completely wrong. And also that, in fitting with this series is the backyard natural history, a lot of what I'll be talking about today. I have some examples from tropical sites, but a lot of what I'm talking about today, you can see in your backyard. A lot of the work we do is one of these species that lives on nannyberry. You could, in a stroll from the Urban Ecology Center along the river, you can collect hundreds of them. So the kinds of things I'll be telling you about are happening literally in your backyard, in your backwoods. And you need to be attuned to a particular form of communication to start getting a sense for what's going on. But the notion that animals like these are just standing there doing nothing is surprisingly often completely wrong. And what's happening is they're using a form of communication that is, sound to communicate. Is just not the usual form that we're used to, right? Like right now, the sound that we normally think of is transmitted through air as pressure waves that travel and activate the membranes in your ears. But there's all other forms of sound that happen in nature. The basic idea, the technical definition of sound is a mechanical disturbance of a medium, right? So right now I'm causing a mechanical disturbance of the air, but any medium that undergoes some kind of mechanical disturbance like that is also sound. So, like maybe you heard a few years ago at UWM, UWM people were part of the team that detected gravitational waves in space from when a black hole collapses. Actually, from when two black holes collapse into a bigger one. Well, that, technically speaking, is sound. And it's super common in nature, right? So we have animals that use kind of what we do, airborne sound. But there's also, even within the air, there's two kinds. There's the pressure waves, and you need some kind of membrane to vibrate. But there's also, that's called far field sound. But there's also near field sound, which is the pressure waves, as they move, cause particles in the air to move. And there's animals that have, in this case, you see the super feathery antenna. Those are used to actually sense the movement of the particles. And that's called near field sound. So the annoying sound that mosquitoes make, that's their near field courtship call. Then there's underwater sound, right? Mechanical disturbance of the water inside. And there's many different kinds of fish that use that form of sound to communicate. And there's even surface waves on the water. This is a technique that was developed to visualize the movement of the surface waves that water striders use to communicate. So there's all sorts of sounds, and the kind of communication I'll be talking about today is called, it refers to sounds that are born along solids, along could be the ground, could be, insects on rocks. I'll be mainly focusing on sounds that are transmitted along plant stems. So the way that how the waves move is not like this relative to the direction of transmission, but like this along the stems. So it's a little, we're completely alien to it because we don't really have that access to that modality of communication. So I want to spend some time painting a picture of what that's like to you. So normally, when we think of insect sound, we're familiar with, and we tend to think of something like the following. Did that play okay?
Yes.
Okay. So so we think simple, repetitive, robotic kind of things, very broadband pitch range of pitches in it. And at best, if it's going to be super complex, I'm going to play you a bat recording of ultrasound made by these are the lesser wax moth. You maybe have encountered them if you have anything to do with these. I did some research with them. So if they could be, they move their wings to make noise, and you don't hear it, but if you use a bat recorder, it's something like this. And they do that for hours and hours every night for a few nights until they die. And but it's still, it's a much higher rate, but very broadband, very repetitive, kind of boring, if I'm honest. But once you tap into, and I'll tell you in a moment about ways to tap into sound. Once you tap into substrate-borne sounds, you start hearing things like the following. That's 4 insects on a potted plant in the lab. Maggie's seen this, chorusing, and so you have your potted plant in the lab right here. Just a few minutes after collecting them by the river, and it's like you have your own frog chorus in here, like it's collapsed in space, and they're much. Right, I think you'll agree, they're much sweeter sounds, much more vertebrate-like. Give you a different example. These are juveniles of that same species I just played you. And what they're doing is they're moving muscles on their body and to directly impart the vibration through their legs in the plant and send it and communicate. So that's those 2 nymphs communicating with some other nymphs out in the plant. Different example where you see the movement that produces it. So this kind of thing is so unusual, right? It seems like it's not the normal sound that insects are that we're familiar with. But if you do a survey of all the cases that are out there that are known, turns out that the majority of insects that are using some form of sound, right, some form of mechanical disturbance of a medium, are doing this and nothing else, or are doing that plus airborne or waterborne or some other kind. So this should count as the most common form of sound that insects make. We're just not entirely familiar with it, or very unfamiliar with it. And it turns out, a lot of the research that's happening turns out that many different kinds of animals, including vertebrates, but tons of spiders and insects, and many different groups were just beginning to to get a sense for how widespread it is across the different kinds of animals, and how widespread it is in terms of the different kinds of relationships and ecological interactions in which this modality works. What I'll be telling you about is, well, obviously insect sound, as you may be gathering, and focusing on a family of plant-feeding insects that are called tree hoppers. They're famous for, their sap-feeding insects, and they have these super weird, super elaborate modifications of their pronotum, of the covering of their thorax, ostensibly hypothesized for being camouflaged on plants or mimicking ants, but they seem to go way beyond Call of Duty to imitate, to get weird shapes. So there's interesting things going on there. These are all tropical examples, but they're like my backyard in the tropics. But this is my backyard, in my front yard in Missouri, actually. And you can get, you find neat examples in your yards here in Milwaukee, probably. Also in Boston, probably. So I want to tell you a little bit about research into how this sound moves along that. So I'll have examples from my work, examples from other people's work, just to paint you a picture of the kind of complexity that's involved here, right? So we're talking about transmission along a plant stem. So you have a frontal view of the stem and a critter on it. And the way the sound moves is, right, so you have, let's say this animal is there signaling. So the vibration from the body to the legs imparts the sound. And near the source of right where this critter is standing, the sound is going to go like this. Right, so along the stem, with most of the energy along the angle at which the animal is imparting it on the stem. But as it goes further and further away, it goes more circular, so it has more components of movement in other angles, in other directions relative to the point of origin of the stem. So the further away, the more circular that the pattern of movement becomes. And they produce this to find each other, to beckon somebody come over here, and we'll talk about different contexts in which that happens. So the one question is, how on earth how we locate sounds is type differences between the arrival to one ear and the other, and then we go like this, we go like that. That's how we get a sense for, I mean, it's more complex than that, but that's mainly how we get a sense for where things are coming from. How do they do this? And one observation is, what they do is notice the time differences in the arrival of sounds between the front and the back legs. And then time differences as they move about plants. They're trying, here's a male trying to locate a female. As they progress along their route, are the time differences getting smaller or getting bigger? So what you see in this little cartoon here is the time differences increase in color from very small in blue to, yeah, so he's getting warmer and warmer and warmer as he's going up the stem, getting closer to his target. And you can see the distance between the dots. The worse the time differences are, right? The less clues there are, the more he moves to increase the chance that to create the opportunity for differences to be noticed. And as those differences get stronger and stronger, then the steps get smaller and smaller because there's greater certainty. So the physics, the bioacoustics of it are super complex, and they can handle it. I see there's a chat. Should I pause and take a question?
I think the chats are mainly saying how awesome this is so far.
Okay. Go. Okay, so I'll keep babbling until you tell me to, and somebody tells me there's a question, or a comment or whatever. So yeah, it's the one motif I'll have today is over and over again. What business, like we were chatting about, a friend of mine that works on chloroplast, you know, plant ecologist, physiologist, and she works on behavioral chloroplasts. And like, what business do chloroplasts have to be, you know, behaving at all? And I'm like, what business do these animals have having with these complex forms of communication, right? One thing that comes out of tapping into this modality is the complexity that they can handle is way more than you would have anticipated. So one thing that, you know, I was playing you some examples. I'll play you a few more. This should, what I'm going for is you should get a sense of eerie familiarity, right? This is very un-insect-like, but it's also something. Here's a, you know, one individual, single male from that, you know, producing his mate searching call. So in airborne sound insects, it's sk, sk. Like the unit of repetition is sk. Here it's this insane multi-component, you know, there's like formants and structure in the frequencies that they use. Give you a different example, and the one I played you is, well, it's a tropical example of an ancestor of the group that we get here in North America. Different example. And some of them to me sound like whale song. Frankly, they get even more insane than this. And it's, well, that's what birds do. That's what frogs. That's what vertebrates sounds like with the structure that they have. And it's, you know, when it's even kind of what we do, right? When we think of human communication, we're used to thinking of our words in terms of text, right? So you get letters that are combined with those letters, etc. But the way we process it in the way we hear it is kind of like, you know, like other vertebrates. So kind of like these insects are going. This I got my wife to do this babbling, and she hates it when I do this, but I have the recording. So like, look at the way you say, well, what's the difference between these syllables, right? Between ba and da. Well, it's one begins with a B, one begins with a D, and whatnot. But listen, if we analyze it like we analyze animal sounds, ba, da, ga. It's the structure of the frequency component at the level of the syllable. D, do. That makes the difference. So the weird thing about these insect sounds is that they're so vertebrate-like, right? They're doing what we're doing, suggesting that their brains can handle way more than we would have initially anticipated. And the other thing that you might notice is the overall range of frequencies is also in the vertebrate range, right? Like those moths I showed you, they're so small, the sound is ultrasonic. We need a bat detector to notice it. Once you tap into the substrate, you get, you know, perfectly good vertebrate-like frequencies that in the airborne sound takes a much larger, like it takes something like this you know, this frog that eats raffas for breakfast to reach that level. So interesting things happen when you start tapping into this. What I'll be telling about it, you know, I've been telling is this in your backyard kind of thing. It's a species complex that originated in Central America and then migrated northward and colonized a whole bunch of different host plants in North America. And talking about having students in the lab, the story of how this, initially people thought there is one species that is super widespread and it uses a whole bunch of different host plants. It's a host plant generalist. And the researcher that discovered that it's actually a whole bunch of super specialized different species, each on their own host plant, is he was getting his degree at Cornell at the time. He's called Tom Wood, and somebody told me the story. He was having a row with his old prof, and he just, it was not going well. Like this project wasn't working. Just stormed out of the professor's office and said, "That's it, I'm done with this crap." And like just, he was switching work, switching advisor, switching everything, switching animals. And he just stormed out of the office and said, the first thing I see as I come out, that's what I'm going to be working on. Stormed out. There was a bush with these tree hoppers. Like, hey, I'm working on this, henceforth. And that was completely serendipitous, but it led to a huge discovery. If you look at the adults that are, those pictures that I have labeled B, they're pretty much indistinguishable across different species. But if you look at the juveniles, you look at the names, they are super distinct, different colors, different patterns, different, some are camouflage, some are like, you might almost think they're aposematic. And that was the first indication, like, hey, there's something going on here. And what you get is different species on different host plants with very different forms differences in their signals and their mate preferences. I've been talking about tapping into the substrate to notice what's happening here. There's many different ways of doing that. The most expensive are laser vibrometers like this. And the least expensive are phono cartridge needles, like you used to play long play records. You can just tap the needle and have an amplifier and record it. You get pretty much the same quality recordings with the cheapest and the most expensive. One advantage of the laser vibrometers is you're not loading the substrate, so you're not altering the features of the substrate. So here's an example of the lab setup, where you see a red dot where the laser is shining, and then it monitors the movement of the substrate. And this is, I'm an end user of this technology. I'm not developing any of this. This is developed by engineers that use these things to check that something that shouldn't be vibrating isn't in different kinds of gear. This just happens to be super convenient to make these recordings. And one interesting thing is once you're tapped into the plant, you get used to noticing that plants are noisy creatures. Now, like if I have a plant next to me and I'm not hearing anything, it's just weird. I feel disconnected. For example, I'm going to play you a recording of this is one of these insects walking on the plant. That's like one of the cutest sounds that I'm familiar with, just like the pitter patter of little feet in the Substrate-borne channel. So in the species complex, the story of how their speciation works is shifts in host plant species and coevolution between their mating signals and their mate preferences. So I'm going to play you a recording of one male producing an advertisement signal. I hope that worked, but I keep hoping the sound effect doesn't work. Then I tell you that's the sweetest sound you've never heard. And then
what was the R2D2 like sound in the background? The little beep boop beep boop boop.
That's an artifact of the program I use the acoustics program I use. You can get rid of noise in the recording but there's an effect of filtering the noise out, which adds those little things. The psychedelic component. Well, actually, the male is the psychedelic component.
And there's also just a question: is the sound coming from their movement vibration on the stems, or is it from a vocal perspective?
So it's coming from their literally vibrating the muscles on their thorax, and that moves the whole body and sends vibrations through their legs onto the stem, and then the stem transmits it. And then the laser is recording it at a distance, short near the male. So there's no vocal anything. However, the way they perceive, and then they perceive it through the travels. Then there's the critter standing here. It shakes this critter's legs, and that goes up the body, and that's how they sense it. They have, like, in crickets, there's a structure on the tibia of the leg that's evolved a membrane, so they have ears on their legs, and that's exactly the same thing that gets moved, except there's no membrane. It's just the direct movement. So it's a completely different way of sensing right? Imagine if you were perceiving sounds through your feet, kind of thing. But once you record this and then you play it back, the frequency, all the temporal and frequency components are the ones that are being transmitted in the plant. So we're playing it back with audio, but it's literally the signals that they use.
I have a question regarding the membranes on their legs. Do you have any idea whether those membranes are specialized for just the communication, or are they used for other things?
Their structures derived. So the technical term for how this originates is proprioception, which is, how do you know that? Yes. How do you know you keep track of your body position and that kind of thing? Mm-hmm. And what a lot of insects have is in the tibia, they have a derived form of that's called the subgenial organ, that actually senses the distortions in it could be the absolute amount or the velocity or the acceleration of movement. Mm-hmm. And it's become specialized for detecting these sounds that travel through the substrate. Mm-hmm. So it's a specialized organ, and it's one thing that we locked out is the laser vibrometer that we use. What it does is, you have a laser light that gets reflected back to the vibrometer, mm-hmm. and as the substrate moves, the pattern of the scatter of the reflection changes. Mm-hmm. So you get a recording that is proportional to the velocity of the movement, right? Mm-hmm. There's other things that you measure the magnitude of the movement, mm-hmm. or the acceleration. It just so happens that the laser records the velocity of the movement, and the tree hoppers are sensitive to the velocity of the movement.
Mm-hmm. Has anybody gone a step further, or have you, to find out if there's some kind of language that they're communicating, something that's a language?
Funny you should say that. There's a little bit of that coming in a moment. Not a language exactly. They have some elements of language like we do, but they not so that you rear these in complete isolation, never met any other critter, and they develop their species typical mating signals and mate preferences. So it's not a language in the sense that they don't need to learn it, and they're not necessarily saying, honeybees, for example, can be said to have a language because you heard of the waggle dance and all that, right? So they will point other bees to a source of nectar, and they communicate in the hive in the dark, away from the source. So they're doing a referential form of symbolic communication. These are simpler forms of communication. But in a moment, I'll get to some bits of some elements that they have in common with other vertebrate forms of communication and even human language.
Thank you.
We have one more quick question in the chat here. Wondering about the density and structure of the stem having an impact on the sound. Do they prefer different plants as giving better sounds than others?
They prefer different plants on general principles because they have very strong host plant preferences just to be on them, right? They don't survive well on host plants used by other members of different host plants, and so they need to feed on their own host plant species, and they have preferences. They also don't want to be on a different host plant species in general. In terms of do they sense that, and different host plants, they have different transmission features of the signals. There is evidence that there is some selection that favors signal divergence out of that, but in a moment we'll get to something where the main cause of evolutionary change in signals seems to be the preferences that the females have for the signals. So it is a thing, but it's much less a thing than you might expect. And part of the reason is if you're to zoom in on these signals, they're pretty much pure tones because it's there's a one-to-one correspondence between the muscles that move and you see a sine wave in the muscle and you see a sine wave in the signal. So if you input a pure tone into a transmission channel, you're going to get pretty much that pure tone out. Maybe it gets attenuated a little bit or not, but it doesn't get distorted doesn't get distorted much. So I played you that was the one male calling, and the observation we have is in the complex in North America, they have diverged in the plants that they use to live on, and they have diverged in the signals. I'm going to play you an example of the lowest, the highest pitch exemplar in the complex and the lowest pitch exemplar in the complex. So that's the range of divergence. So this is a study where we were asking, is it evolutionary change by because of isolation by distance across half the continent? Is it about the host plant on which they are? What is it about? And so what I'm going to show you is pie charts that assign the amount of differences that you see between different host plants, between host plants of the same species across different sites, and just individual variation. And what you find is that it's mostly about the host plant. This is looking at the pitch, right, of the sound. But if you look at other features of the signals, it's always the case that green is bigger than gray. It's mostly about, right, so one thing that one of the things that is initiating divergence and speciation is getting into a different host plant. So then the question, well, is it about the transmission by different host plants? We've tested that hypothesis a number of times, and the simplest way is you have one individual, put the individual on this plant, record them, put it in a different plant, record them, and what happens? And what we find over and over again is that doesn't change anything. And that's because like I was saying, the signals are such pure tones that what could possibly change? What happens is they hate being on a different plant, so they make fewer shorter signals, but the ones that they make are transmitted fairly well. Maybe there could be selection because they're getting attenuated a little bit, so there could be some selection to use different frequencies that optimize best, or like the behavioral preference for getting on the plant where your sound carries the most. I will get to that in a moment. The other thing that happens in this communication system is, right, the males have produced this mating signal. And if there's a female on that plant and she likes him, she calls back. She produces a signal of her own, establishes a duet where the male calls, female response, male, female, male, female, male, female. And that's what guides the male as he goes on this trek trying to find the female on the plant. So I'm going to play you a recording of a male-female duet. And if he doesn't hear anything, if she doesn't like him, she doesn't respond, he doesn't know that there's anybody on that bush, he takes off and goes away. So it's a complete, it's a female-driven selective duetting that regulates pair formation.
Rafa, are there any instances where she wouldn't reply right away? Like, or is pretty much if she hears it, she's going to reply?
No. They're very selective.
Okay.
If she does not like his, what they seem to care the most about is the pitch, right? The dominant frequency of the signal. So it has to be the right frequency that individual female likes, then she'll respond. If she doesn't like him, she will not respond. And they're we are not supposed to sorry, not supposed to anthropomorphize critters like that, but I'm horrible at that. To me, that female call, it sounds like an appreciative and that beckons the male to you may start searching for me. Sometimes they can be selective not only in whether they respond or not, but sometimes it's a shorter call. So it's sometimes they go like, I was like, let's see how you do. Or there's no response. Or if they really hate them, they make a wing buzz that sounds very loud. It's very, very loud, and it sounds to me very angry. And they need to be, the males start signaling before females become receptive. Then a couple of weeks later, females start responding, and they're very selective about it. And there's some cases where we track the whole individuals throughout the whole mating season, and there's some females that get to the end and the males are all gone and they never replied to anybody. They were too picky for their own good. So this gives us a convenient way to do playback experiments, presenting stimuli varying in features and asking about the female preferences. So what I'm going to play now is a computer-generated signal, playback of a male that's just been imparted into the plant by shaking literally shaking the plant with a computer, and one female interacting with the computer as if it was a live male. So using their natural system of communication, as far as they're concerned, they're on the plant, the female's on the plant, she's perfectly happy. There's a signaling male, she's interacting with the male. You can literally give them questionnaires like you do in a psychological study. You can say, how do you like this guy? How do you like this guy? Or silence or a wing buzz kind of thing. So using that technique, you can do something that we call these mate preference functions, where you have variation in a signal trait and then like a variation in the attractiveness. And that's the other hypothesis to compete with the notion of transmission, selection due to transmission along the plant stems. So what I have here is that same curve of the mate preference curve. It's a description of behavior, and we can describe this for individual females. This one here is a summary of the behavior of a sample of females. But it's not only a description of behavior, it's also a hypothesis about the form of selection if the main cause of selection is mate choice. And then we can make it compete. It's a lot of work to get this curve I'm showing you in pink, but this is the signal transmission function this the host plant of this particular species. So this attenuation curve in pink is, you know, at 0, that would be no attenuation across any frequencies. But, you know, obviously some frequencies are transmitted better than others. Some are attenuated more than others. So here you have a description of the transmission features of the plant that is also a hypothesis about the form of selection if the main cause of selection is optimizing transmission. And this, you know, we only have this for one species because it's a boatload of work to, you know, find the aggregation where they're signaling during the mating season at the time that matters. Where on the plant are they doing that? That's where the place that matters. Okay, describe that with 2 lasers. Very complicated. But, you know, we have this available for one species. And then, fortunately, they make competing predictions about what the optimal positioning of signals should be. And then a huge amount of work, somebody else's dissertation, recording males and then tracking them throughout the mating season, see how they do with mating success. And you get a fitness function like this. This is for the one species, variation in dominant frequency and the correlated mating success. And what you find is that this is almost, I mean, Darwin would be perfectly at home with this finding. Obviously, it's about sexual selection and mate choice, but it's still mind-boggling to me that the individual behavioral preferences of the females dictate, you know, there's almost a perfect match with what the males are doing and how well they do out there than the very substrate on which they communicate, right? It's as if I was saying, well, in humans, it's about the mate preferences, and whatever the air is doing makes no difference whatsoever. Well, it makes a little bit of a difference, right? Because it's slightly off, but not terribly much, right? So it makes a lot of sense to think that there is a contribution due to the transmission features of the different plants, and it's not nothing, but it's mate choice where it's at. So we spend a lot of time thinking about the causes of change in mate preferences and the way those relate to signal evolution. Okay, so but I've been, all I'm telling you about is cartoons of cartoons of cartoons, right? And the one cartoon is, these are complex signals, and I started telling you how complex they are, how vertebrate-like they are, and then I just simplified everything and used constant frequency stimuli to ask questions about blah, blah, blah. And the truth is, it's often in nature, it's way more complicated than that. This is, you know, suppose it's not one feature, it's 2 features, then you have preference surfaces, but often it's, you know, it's a ton of features, right? So this is a study looking at the courtship displays in birds, and the best you can do is each of these each of these triangles or squares or whatnot is one of the features in the multivariate display. And people trying to describe, you know, how this works. The lines connect, you know, how strongly do different components correlate with each other, and then the colors looking like from up and down. That's the strength of the effect on the mate preference, and it just, you know, it makes me despair. Like, how are we supposed to get an intuitive sense for what's going on here? But it's not even, it's worse than that. It's more like along the lines of, how the hell are these critters processing it, right? And sometimes the displays get so ridiculously complex that one literally despairs. Actually, the researchers literally despair. What I'm going to show you is an example of this. People trying to describe the courtship behavior of jumping spiders, and what they ended up doing is, well, this is like movements in a symphony. So there's, you know, motifs within movements and a sequence of movements, and this is that temporal, you know, those transitions over time, motif to motif to movement, is the best they could come up with describing this. And okay, fine, that's the description, but it makes me wonder, how are these brains, right? These are, in the end, maybe they're more sophisticated than we anticipated, but they're animal brains, and they're like insect brains, or spider brains. They're tiny, right? How are they handling this complexity? Can they even handle this complexity? But if they couldn't handle it, why would it be there to begin with, right? So towards the question of, is this a language? One language-related hypothesis that we were interested in is maybe the way that a simple brain can handle this complexity is by a trick called chunking or combinatorial processing, and that's what we do, right? So in our language, we have sounds and syllables that we group into words, and other syllables that we group into other words, and those get grouped into phrases, and those get grouped into sentences, and so on ad infinitum, right? In practice, we can handle like 4 or 5 levels of this, but the language is universal in its ability to handle as deep a hierarchy as you like. And once we've done that, right, we're not keeping track of individual syllables or individual words or individual phrases. We're keeping track of ever bigger chunks, right? So then the new chunk gets processed as a unit, and you can get other ones, and that simplifies the handling. Now, if they have the ability to do this, it simplifies the handling. And the way that this happens with humans is, there's rules for the combinations that can get chunked or not, right? So we have phonology and we have syntax, or the linguists don't like syntax, they talk about grammar, but that's what's going on, right? The Noam Chomsky classical example is to prove that those rules work regardless of meaning is, saying, there's the sentence. I think I have a recording of Maggie saying this, but I neglected to include it. You can say colorless green ideas sleep furiously. It's completely nonsense and completely correct syntactically. With animals, we have difficulty dissecting meaning from rules of combinations because we need them to respond. But let's see how far we can go. So we wanted to ask, is this happening in these kinds of critters? And we have a simple starting point, which is in these tree hoppers, there is a male signal with 2 components. There's that and then brr pulses at the end. So okay, we can handle that. We can start manipulating that. So we ran an experiment that tested combinatorial hypotheses. The basic level of this kind of thing that we're going on, which is phonology, preferences for the particular combinations of elements, competing with a hypothesis of no, it's not that complicated. They just attend to how the signal begins, and then whatever comes later they can handle, or they don't care. Any combination can work. And there's evidence from birds and mammals supporting, and frogs supporting all of these. So they're realistic competing hypotheses. So this is a playback experiment, shaking the plant, individuals standing there responding, and we were using different combinations of those 2 elements, the whine and the pulses. And the finding is, if you have the natural combination against lone elements, they prefer the natural combination. So fair enough, that's rules out the no rule hypothesis, but it doesn't really distinguish between combinatorial and beginning. And then if you invert the elements, they prefer the natural combination. So again, that we know they have some kind of rule, but is it a combinatorial rule? We're still not sure. The key distinction came from presenting the natural element against a stimulus having the natural element, but starting with the wrong component, starting backwards. And you find they don't care. they were perfectly happy with something that starts off, but has the right element combination afterwards. So they really do have a combinatorial rule. They are doing a language-like component of processing. And then we said, I started telling you what they care the most about is the dominant frequency of the signals, the pitch. And what you see across different species, each of these colors is a species on a different host plant. They really care deeply about it, and those preferences co-evolve strongly. Actually, we have, I don't have the data to show you now, but we have evidence that changes in the preferences there's an arrow of causation from change in preference to change in signal, is not the other way around. And they're super strongly matched, right? They co-evolve very tightly. So we asked, compared to this very strong preference, how strong is the rule for the right combinations? So we had a playback experiment where we vary the frequency of the stimulus, and for across that continuum, we have the right and the wrong element combinations, and the pattern you find. So that you get with one of those, right? This is the Wien impulses in natural combination, and deviating from the preferred frequency is bad. And then you have the same range of variation in the frequencies and with the inverted combination. And you find that deviating is still bad, but having the wrong combination is as bad as having a very ugly frequency indeed. So it's a very strong rule, up there with the strongest things that they care about in the complex. So then that was an early stage for asking, are these kinds of things going on in those brains? Yes, they are to some extent. Question is, where you despair in even getting a sense for the complexity of the things they're doing in their displays. Are they processing it like that? It's a possibility, but that the next step is going to be asking it for at higher levels of complexity. Are we for time? Are we still okay for time, Maggie?
Yeah, I think it's 10:03, so if folks need to leave, they can. I'll stick around until you finish, but good time check here.
Let me just I'll play you 2 more videos, and then I'll stop. How about that? Because I've been telling you about mating, make choice, mating behavior. But that's not all they do. There's perfectly respectable foraging behavior to be done, perfectly respectable naturally selected business to be done, and this form of communication is they use it in all aspects of their lives. So what I'm gonna show you is 2 videos of this is one species that needs very tender leaves to feed on. And so throughout their development on the plant, they're born out of the eggs, they need to migrate several times up the plant looking for more tender leaves. And that is an exodus that they're very conservative in departing from where they are. They do not like to move. They do not like to switch plants. So it's a whole enterprise to move 30 centimeters to move to a different leaf. And what they do is there's an aggregation of siblings, of juveniles, and they send out a scout to explore. And if the scout finds the right place, then the scout does this. the scout, they send out a scout and the scout gets to an appropriate place, and then it starts, I think you'll agree with me, it starts moving, right? And you can see that it's the abdomen moves, but it's actually the muscles imparting the vibration onto the legs. And that elicits other siblings to move up and join. And when each gets to that site, the newcomers do this. They start moving in unison to get their other siblings to join up and to risk the exodus. So this brings us full circle to where we started. If you're just watching these, you think they're boring, they're not doing anything, they're just standing there on their, they're standing on their food doing nothing. How easy is that life? And actually it's a huge risky enterprise, and they have super complex coordinated behavior that helps them negotiate their difficult lives.